It's time for Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnet Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
Welcome to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here with my co-host
Barnet Bain. Good morning, everyone.
The sexy voice is back.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
That's what
It's that Kim Carnes thing. Worked for her, didn't it?
It really did.
Yeah,
it works for you, man. There's a huge following.
She's a little hotter than I am.
A little bit.
She had more to work with going in. So,
Hey,
Good Friday to everybody.
Yeah, Good Friday. So everything is good around here. We're pleased to be with you today, and
We're pleased to be with you every day, any day. I'm just pleased.
But we're all here
I'm
once a
pleased.
week.
The eyes flap back, and I'm pleased.
That's it. Hey, I wanted to bring something up to you. I was watching 60 Minutes again.
Good.
I do
You're
that
in that
once in a while.
education program.
Yeah, I like
you
that.
You going for an advanced degree?
That's it. And there was an interesting segment that I thought was pertinent to what we might be discussing today. Do you know this guy Sergio Marchionne, the CEO of
Fiat Chrysler.
Well, he was at Fiat. That's right. He took over Fiat and saved them, and now he has taken over Chrysler 2 years ago, actually, and has totally turned that company around. And I thought what was interesting about this guy, there were so many things about the interview that I thought were really remarkable. He was really engaged and present, and felt very approachable. And he seems to really break with the traditional mode of a CEO. And I love the couple pieces about this interview I really love. One thing I love is that he abandoned the executive suite of Chrysler. The entire sort of, I don't know if it's the fifth floor or
The whole ivory tower.
It's all gone. There's no one there. It's empty. It's just sitting there empty. And he moved his offices down to the fourth floor, which is where the engineers are. So it must have been the fifth floor, or I don't know, something. But anyhow, the top floor. And then one of the other things I thought was really brilliant is he's a big aficionado of opera and classical music and the arts in general. But he actually has music playing at work. He has classical music playing when he's working, which I thought was really interesting, and it brought to mind the concept of artist as innovator. That, in the sort of traditional model, at least in my mind, and I've even read an article recently, I think it was in Fortune magazine, I was having some dental work done, maybe it was Money magazine, one of those two, and they were talking about how athletes make good leaders, and sort of, the guy, the head of GE and the head of IBM, these are former athletes who, whatever, and there was a whole premise behind why they make good leaders. And yet this Marchionne guy breaks that. He's the artist innovator. And I thought that that was really interesting in terms of what we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely. I mean, this idea of artistry, people have a conditioning because the culture so values artistry from one particular perspective. That you have to create crafts, or that you have to have some sort of bohemian lifestyle, or that you have to be a musician or an opera lover. But there is a more ancient meaning of artistry and a more ancient tradition around developing artistry, and that has to do with the mastery that is involved in being exposed to a discipline with rigor repeatedly, and often under the in the umbrage of a master, in the umbrage of somebody that you apprentice to, or that you have a model for certain kinds of behaviors that become inculcated and eventually move from the concept into the body, because art does not happen in the brain.
That's right.
Art is not a head trip.
That's right. In fact, it's interesting because I've brought up many times my son and his dancing. And when we found at age 6, when he was the ring bearer at a wedding, that he was this remarkable dancer. So immediately my wife and I rushed out and got him in dance classes. And it all shut down. He started thinking about it, and he wasn't able to, enjoy it, but ultimately really wasn't very good at it.
But that's developmental.
But
you
then,
shut down.
Right.
You're shut down because we do process mentally.
Right.
And then it begins to move into, it begins to engage other intelligences. You begin to understand the movement of energy, and begin to understand that energy is moving not just in the head but in the body. And
well, this is the point. And all I was going to say is then last year, a friend, or not that long ago, maybe 4 months ago, a friend turned 50, and we went to his birthday party, and Antonio found it again. He was out there cutting it up. And that's the piece, is that, and when I was an actor, the idea of get it in your body. I have to get this in my body,
Yeah.
was very real, because when it's in the head, it's conceptual, and that doesn't really translate. And that actually is the piece with this CEO, is that he very much embodies a quality of leadership. But I'm saying, and I think that's what we're both saying, it's an artistic quality, and it's very grounded in his beingness. I don't know exactly what language. Well, let's talk to our guest about this, because he'll probably help us.
What a coincidence! Another one of these incredible.
Yeah, see how this works.
Well, I think it's fantastic, actually, that you brought that to the show, because we have with us today a guest in studio who can speak to precisely to this point. In fact, much of what I know in terms of not as a head trip, you know how heady I am, but much of what I know experientially, I learned from him, directly from him. So we are very pleased today to have my dear friend Scott Cody with us in studio. Scott is the founder of Sage Alliance Partners, a consulting firm specializing in leadership development. And he has worked with everyone from rocket scientists at NASA to rock stars, platinum-selling rock stars, and organizations and leaders running the full gamut in between. And many of those organizations have been uplifted, inspired through his work with the Art of Leadership Mastery programs. And I am thrilled to have him here with us as our guest at Cutting Edge Consciousness. Hey, Scott.
How you guys doing?
Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks
Good
for
to
having
have
me.
you here.
Great
Great
to
to
have
have you
you.
here. So, I know this is absolutely your conversation. This is absolutely where you live. Before you can lead anyone, you've got to be, I learned this from Scott Cody, by the way, you've got to be sufficiently present in your own skin with a sense and a relationship with your own vitality before you're A, trustworthy, and B, have the ability and the vitality to be a leader.
Exactly. It's a kind of a skill that you can learn, and anybody can learn. That's the fantastic thing when you put your whole body into the learning process. And so much of what we do in business, we kind of think we have to learn in college, and it's all that's good information and all that's really valuable, but it may not be sufficient to get you to where you want to go. And we ignore the body in the education process, by and large, and these days embodied learning is starting to catch on and really producing a lot of dividends for people.
Some of the stakes, so people have a sense in their cars of what we're talking about here, how it lands in their lives. I think, I don't know whether I read this, I dreamed this, I heard it from Freeman, or I got it from you. Or maybe from Barry, our board op. Hi, Barry.
You just
Good to see
downloaded
you.
it.
I downloaded it, yeah. This idea of sucking it up and having this trim waist, and it's all up in the pecs, and it's all that when we are holding ourselves in that way, we are unstable, and you can be knocked over by a feather. And the opposite extreme, we see modeled in things like samurai warriors and Kurosawa movies, where these guys with little pigtails and huge bellies, these ferocious warriors. These guys looked like old-style ball players. They had bellies, and they were grounded, and they were in those bodies. But this love affair that we have with sucking it up, I understand, came out of Prussia.
Oh, interesting.
And once upon a time, it was felt that if the Prussian armies had to suck it up, they would be more compliant.
Really interesting.
Now, isn't that fantastic?
Yeah. A lot of our structures and ways of operating came out of ancient military, because those are some of the oldest organizations on the planet. So, for instance, in companies today, and organizational structure and all that technology came from old military days as a way of facilitating communication. So I'm not surprised that that came out of the Prussians.
What's interesting? That brings up for me one of the things that Barnet and I have talked about a lot. And Scott, you haven't been around me a lot, but one of the big messages I got growing up was I was too sensitive, which was really a challenge. And the language, in fact, was suck it up. And I had an interesting experience, kind of a moment. I was in a workshop, and there was this huge man, this incredible leader who was facilitating it. And he was working with me, and I kept wanting to story. I kept wanting to tell him a story of whatever the circumstances were we were going through, and he kept going, "That's not it. That's not it. That's not it." And finally, I said to him, "I'm scared."
Mm-hmm.
And he looked me in the eye and he said, "I can trust a man who's scared."
Right.
It was a very powerful moment because the idea of integrity as being integrated. You know, I have these ideas, these sort of slogans I bought into about integrity. You know, we see these in business books. The other version, not your version, where it's a slogan, but it's not embodied.
Right.
And to embody it actually allows for, paradoxically, allows for this part that we think is in essence the problem. And the truth is it's not. It's our rejection or denial of that aspect of us, being scared, for example, that then causes the imbalance.
My teacher, Richard Strozzi Heckler, is a 6th degree Aikido master and a PhD psychologist, where I began learning this in 1995, told me that a warrior's greatest weakness is his inability to admit weakness.
Wow. Yeah.
And that you would admit that you're scared, that produced instant trust. You know, and trust is the coin of the realm when it comes to leadership. And these old ways of sucking it up, that gets us through. That helps us not feel so much, because in a male-dominated business culture, what people don't want is emotions, because they're not competent in dealing with them and they're uncomfortable. So they want to clamp everybody down to get to the stuff that's not messy. But the messy stuff is where the artistry is. That's where innovation lives, in the discomfort. And that discomfort is in your body.
Well, you have a model for framing how we can begin to develop an intimacy with ourselves and with our, not just our body, but including our body. You have elements to that: body, emotion,
Language. Spirit. And then you have all four of those things coming together, like, let's say, 4 concentric circles. In the middle is your, what I say is your authentic self. And it's how all those 4 pieces are working together or not that's producing the you that the community or others are perceiving and experiencing in their interactions with you. Not just your words, your nonverbal, your emotions, your mood. And all that is surrounded by mood, which you know is a story that you live in. Mm-hmm. So the mood affects all 4 of those pieces, and those pieces interact to creating the authentic self that you are, which is really what shows up when you're under stress or under pressure.
It's interesting because I think of this sort of as expanding the container, or often the word box is used, you know. Mm-hmm. Well, it's used actually in a way where we say, think outside the box. I always think that's dangerous. You know, if you think outside the box and get it right, you're a genius. If you get it wrong, you're fired, right? But this idea, instead of expanding the box to allow for a greater sense of all these pieces, they get to fit in the box, you know, versus having to only have it one way. You know, you think outside the box in sort of one capacity, you get it right, yippee, versus allowing for a greater breadth of humanity and maybe even of failure. I mean, there's that line that, you know, success is made up of a lot of failures, or I'm blowing it, but you know what I'm saying, that this expanding, so there's a greater sense of what's allowed into the container, if you will.
The point about failure, you know, I reframe that just a little bit.
Okay.
In that, yeah, we can look back and through the lens and we could say all these failures somebody had led to success. But they aren't holding them as failures.
That's exactly right.
They're experiences with an unintended consequence.
That's it.
That they learn from.
Yeah.
And they were evidence that they're on their way to something rather than evidence that they weren't.
Yeah, that's the interpreter. So the person
Yes.
who's doing the interpreting
Yes.
has a greater sense of
Yes.
purpose and meaning in themselves. There's more of themselves allowed in the room.
Absolutely. I don't make mistakes anymore. I either get what the result I wanted, or I get learning.
You get data.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's another one. 'Cause
Yeah.
we've talked a lot about the feedback system.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
there's feedback that maybe that's not the path I want to take.
Yeah.
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 But the failure, mistake, those are just words we use to beat ourselves up.
Well, part of the curriculum, some of what I've learned personally going through the Art of Leadership Mastery program, is a different way to hold that experience and to be aware of it, active in my body, not just a whole bunch of head trips, not just a whole bunch of loops, but it has a somatic, it shows up somatically. There is a tension, or there's a thrum, or there's a numbness, or there's a tightness. We have to jump off and pay a couple bills. When we come back, I want you to comment a little bit more to this point, because I know you have a lot to say. about that here on Cutting Edge Consciousness. We'll be right back.
Freeman Michaels here with my co-host Barnet Bain and our guest today, Scott Cody. Before we went to break, Barnet, you were bringing up an important point about the full body somatic experience. So if you don't mind, pick it up right
what
there.
It looks like to be present enough in our skin so that we can hold a lot of inputs without becoming inundated. When we become inundated, we shut down, we become inattentive. One great example that I've seen was watching politicians recently on the rope lines. Without mentioning any names, some of them seem to be in a daze. They don't seem to connect with anybody.
This is huge.
And then, but if we look back at some of the superstars of being large enough in their bodies and present enough to engage and connect one-on-one, even if people are coming at them 10 and 20 a minute. You have people like both Clintons.
Yeah. Well, Bill was masterful. I mean,
masterful.
He had those
masterful.
eyes where he was like, they melted people.
And he would connect. Whatever was going
That's
on,
it.
he
That's
would
it.
connect, and he'd be able to move to the next one. It looks effortless. This is a supreme task to be able to recalibrate a body that has been shut down over years of behavioral loops that are adaptive and that are protective. We do not have the nervous system to hold that much inflow. But I had an experience with you that I'm going to get to in a minute, a fun one called the Samurai Game. But first, I know you have something to say to this point.
Well, it's interesting that you're mentioning Clinton. You know, he did have a tremendous reputation for meeting people and having the people that he's meeting feel like they've known him already their whole lives, like instant, deep connection. And many people have that. I first experienced that in graduate school, meeting Lee Iacocca, speaking of Chrysler.
Sure, of course.
And that it was miraculous, transformative experience for me, just shaking the guy's hand and spending 15 seconds with him. And we see people like that, and we admire that, and we say that they have charisma or they have some.
But then we drive a K car and it's all over.
That's right. That's a horrible idea.
The K car.
God
nice.
bless Lee, but
Nice.
the K car was a bad idea.
But we got to give him props to the Mustang.
Give him
So,
props to
yeah.
the Mustang.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what I've discovered and what's so beautiful about this work and why I've dedicated my life to it is, one, it's easy. Anybody can learn this stuff because we all have bodies. We short-circuit the mind. We go straight for the body. It works if you like it or not, understand it or not, have an opinion about it. We just bypass the mind, train the body. It changes the whole self.
But it requires a training. It requires a discipline and a focus and a mastery as surely as learning to play the flute or the piano.
You don't learn it in a weekend.
Right.
It takes some time. But you apply yourself and it produces the result. But for people, just in terms of like meeting people, you can develop this quality of being able to connect deeply with people in a moment's notice by being able to hold more energy and be more physically present for somebody and connecting with them not only through your words but through your physical body. And when you make that, when you look in somebody's eyes, something is awakened, right? There's something happens there and it's uncomfortable. You notice people look away often when they meet each other, shake hands. It's too much there, a little threatening, a lot of unconscious. But you practice and you train this, and you soften yourself, like you talked about the bellies before.
And the samurais.
You relax your stomach. You look in their eyes, and you get comfortable holding more and more energy, then more and more connection and more relationship.
And more complexity. I mean, this is one of the big pieces. If you're processing everything mentally, we've talked about this a lot on this show. When you're processing everything mentally, the complexity is overwhelming because you're trying to manage. You're compartmentalizing everything. You're putting it in little boxes. And this idea of being present to the complexity there's a whole lot more capacity for holding complexity, at least in my experience.
We say in our program, one of my little sayings is, don't believe everything you think.
Absolutely.
The mind is almost the enemy sometimes. It gets in the way. It's a tremendous asset. But every light has a shadow, and the shadow of the mind is complexity, like you're saying, confusion, short-circuiting the body, and, kind of making something a little more difficult than it should be.
And there's even language for this. When someone says, I can't process this at a mental level, it's such a great piece of language because there's a lot of things in my experience that you can't process at a mental level. And if you try, like you're saying, you're going to short circuit and or, all manner of falling apart could occur.
We human beings, for some reason, have all kinds of thoughts come into our minds. I haven't met anyone that can explain why we have them or how to not have them. It's part of being a human being, having all kinds of thoughts and judgments and come into our mind. What we can do is be responsible for what we choose to focus on.
That's it.
And whether we give those thoughts any meaning or not. And in an untrained person, they give every thought they have some kind of weight or value, and then they process it and analyze it and this and that.
Every thought, every emotion becomes
I think
overwhelming.
I've been guilty of that a couple times.
All of us have. All of us have.
Right.
And, that can lead to some cases depression.
Absolutely.
Because you're just captured by these thoughts.
Yeah.
And this day and age, they have some really great therapies where they're just doing mindfulness training with people, and it's changing their depression. And mindfulness training is really just practicing on choosing what you're going to think about.
Yeah.
And that skill lives in the body.
So I mentioned earlier something called the Samurai Game.
Oh, right.
And I want to talk a little bit about it because it is, so fun for a number of reasons. It's empowering, it's engaging, it's play. And also, it's high drama, and I love a good drama. So, you created an event. You were trained you were trained by George Leonard, who, for our listeners who may or not be familiar with that name, George Leonard was for a long time the president of the Esalen Institute, and prior to that, he was a decorated World War II fighter ace and a look photographer, and I think the first guy to bring to this country Aikido. An incredible, inspiring man, and a graceful man. And he had in his Aikido dojo, he had this game that he created in order to model some of these qualities. And he trained a handful of people to go out and to stage these events, and Scott is one of them. And I had the rare privilege of participating in this thing.
Wow.
And it was so fun. First of all, you walk into this room, and except for the fact that he shows up in his bathrobe and slippers, but in his like junior samurai suit. But it is such a rigorous adult version of integrated, conscious, masterful version of, I guess, when I was a kid and we used to play Capture the Flag. This kind of big, organized group. Thrilling, really, really thrilling stuff. And out of which what emerges very plainly is your character, your ability to make decisions under stress, your ability to lead, your ability to follow orders and be led, your ability to work as part of a team.
Right.
I mean, it really fires on all cylinders. And I don't want to go on about this because I want to invite you to comment on it, but I will say that came a point where I was suddenly found myself at the head of my army. My general had been slayed in the battleground, and I had to go and deliver an impassioned speech to enroll some mercenaries into my rapidly diminishing force. And I could not hold the energy. I did not have a container large enough to do it.
Wow.
So rather than strode, I hobbled out in front of all of these mercenaries, and I bleated. It was a bleat. The most weaselly little, please just come out. We're all getting killed here.
Not one of your greatest moments.
Not a great moment. I didn't get
that.
not one person came over to our side, but it was experientially such a mind blower, such an X-ray into how I function in particular structures of stress.
Well, George Leonard was a true master. He is widely regarded as the father of the human potential movement, or at least one of the
Absolutely.
three fathers of the human potential movement. Wrote many, many books, including Mastery and Education and Ecstasy, which I highly recommend. He's recently passed on. But the samurai game is one of his greatest inventions. He invented it about 35 years ago. And what he was doing is he was going to these fighter pilot reunions after the war, and at these fighter pilot reunions they would reminisce about their experience, and they all noticed that when they were flying into combat, they had superhuman capabilities. Every sense expanded by a few percentage points. Vision got sharper, hearing got more acute. Every sense, and they felt superhuman. And they were wondering if there was a way they could recapture that sense without actually having to go to war, because they detested war.
Yeah, it's no fun.
And he was in Japan, and he was a photographer over there for Look magazine, and falling in love with Japanese culture, studying Aikido, when he came upon this idea of the samurai game to play with his fighter pilot buddies. And what it is it's a role play, a full body role play game, and you become a samurai in 14th century Japan, serving a daimyo or a warlord
with props and with set and setting. I mean, it's really an exquisite piece of theatrical.
Living and dying by the code of Bushido, the warrior's code that guided the samurai, and serving a daimyo. And then you and your army battle another army, and to the death. But the battles are not physical, like nobody's punching or hurting, or they're games of skill or games of chance. But if you lose the game against another samurai, then you're dead, and that's your experience in the game, which gauges the ego. You see, because none of us want to die, in battle and have to lie there. So the ego gets engaged, and then there's a lot of, like in war, there's a lot of, everything isn't perfectly clear. There's a lot of arbitrary situations, a lot of dilemmas, a lot of conflicts, a lot of not complete information, and you have to make decisions, because the beautiful thing about the design is there's a consequence for everything you do.
That's brilliant.
And a consequence for everything you don't do.
Sure.
And that's like life.
It is life.
Yeah. And so it's a real crucible, and you get to see who you really are in this situation of unfair, arbitrary, the fog of war, and the true self comes out. Many people say that it's the most powerful one-day personal development experience they've ever had.
It's pretty powerful. I have been around the block on personal development for well over 32 years now, and that is one of the most unique, one of the most revealing, one of the high points of the whole journey. Are you doing it? Are you planning on doing it?
Yeah, we do one for the public here once or twice a year. So we'll be doing that. And also they can go to samuraigame.org. And Lance Giroux is really taking on holding the integrity of the game and bringing it forth into the world for the Leonard estate. So
the piece that really strikes me, I want to go back, Barnet, because your forthrightness in seeing the mirror of the aspect of you that comes out under stress. And I just want to acknowledge you for that, because, Scott, you haven't heard us talk a lot. Barnet and I talk a lot about the second story, which is, we call it the triumph story. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like an addiction. We're addicted to our triumph story. Mm-hmm. And it lacks depth, whereas moving out of the triumph story and allowing the complexity, allowing the trailing bits to be part of our experience without feeling like we have to fix them or heal them or solve them, just allowing them to come along is liberating. And so I first want to acknowledge you. And then I want to acknowledge that these kinds of experiential workshops, I've done some, I haven't done this one, and I actually look forward to doing it at some point. They bring out a way of getting the feedback. And the part of all of our listeners, I think, of this show, they're here because they're really open to an accurate reflection of themselves, complete with these sort of trailing bits and these parts we haven't known what to do with. And it's the embracing of that doesn't just liberate us, but it actually empowers us. I was speaking earlier about the idea that being sensitive was a problem, and now I see it as my greatest gift. So I want to talk a little bit about that, where we have a perception of what our lives ought to look like that binds us to a kind of restriction that if we can lift it, and this sounds like a way of lifting that, the world seems to open up.
Well, it does two primary things. One, it does reveal that and will take you into that deeper story,
yes,
which is so empowering and so liberating. And also, when you live in that story, produces instant trust with people because it's real.
Yeah, that's right.
There's no pretense.
That's right.
But the game also will reveal hidden qualities and strengths that you didn't know you had that are undeniable. And people will see each other or themselves being miraculous or being courageous or facing a fear, and they didn't know they had it in them, and they proved to themselves they can, and now they can take that into the rest of their lives.
That's fantastic. Okay, we need to take a quick break. When we come back, here's the thing I want to go to. We have been having a conversation for a while now at the level of frequency, where we begin to tap into a different way of perceiving and conceiving of our world. And I know that this is a piece of what you do. So we're going to take a quick break. When we get back, I want to jump into that and get your feedback, but we're going to pay some bills. So stay with us. We'll be right back here on Cutting Edge Consciousness.
And we're back. This is Cutting Edge Consciousness. Barnet Bain here with my co-host Freeman Michaels and our guest Scott Cody. Before the break, Freeman, you wanted to get into something that you've been itching to work with for a couple of weeks now, the frequency conversation.
Well, the truth is it's what we've spoken a lot about.
Sure.
What we talk about is what we're learning and what we're working with. And so much of what I've been tapped into lately, and it's been a topic of conversation on the show, is recognizing things at the level of frequency, recognizing them and sometimes this language can get a little tricky. But I still feel it's the most accurate language. I think it's exactly how it occurs. Again, sort of looking at the quantum piece, which I know we all have a sense of, where everything's energy, and energy is always being expressed, and there's these various frequencies where we begin to tap into a frequency, and our world, as it were, kind of conforms to that. And then we experience the world in that context. But there are other frequencies that we're in moments. In a heightened experience, for example, we're tapped into a certain frequency. And quite literally, things move. And
bandwidth is another way to say it. If
exactly
you only have calibrated to pick up AM, you will not pick up an FM station.
And to keep the radio analogy going, we talk often about having presets where we have these sort of frequencies that are conditioned. They're something that we sort of automatically push unconsciously on the preset dial, if you will. And then the song that plays is, or the story that plays out, or the circumstances tend to be, sort of caught in that certain paradigm, or that certain are expressed in a particular way. So I want to draw you in with this because I know it's a part of how you work, and I know it's a critical part of shifting into this artfulness in our leadership, but really in every facet of our lives.
I think the first thing I'd like to say about that is, how do you do that?
Right.
It's where does that live? What's the antenna for these frequencies? And for me, it's the body. And the problem and the challenge is we're trying to use the mind to language an experience that lives in the body where we don't have the distinctions for it. And so a lot of our greatest masters and the people that we admire in the world, they're tuned in and they're tapped in at multiple channels, multiple levels maybe, if I'm using your analogy properly.
Yeah.
And they have some ability to language it enough where we can maybe follow or try to learn from them. But the training isn't in the language. The training is in expanding the body to pick up more channels.
Yes.
That's really
and
the art of it.
We are not conditioned by our culture to be body aware.
No.
Especially as men.
You and I have discussed this a lot. It's only been recently that I've understood that emotions happen in the body and that they're not a head trip. And for an artist, that's a lot to say, since I'm well aware that art also happens in the body and not in the head. And how much art could I make if I was increasingly, little by little, bringing on more body capacity?
My wife's a fine art painter, and she will get into her painting, and it's a transformative full-body experience. She just loses her whole self to the painting. Time doesn't matter. Many other things doesn't matter. And it's one of the reasons she loves it so much, because it gives her an experience that's almost, transcendent from a daily experience. She dissolves into an artist that's expanded and beyond, just a person in a room painting.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I love the idea of losing herself, and yet we've said this before. It's an idea that we lose ourselves, but at the same time we're discovering ourselves, or we're being discovered by the art. Because as it's coming out, similar to what you were talking about, if someone has this experience in the samurai workshop, and then that's a new point of reference of that's an aspect of them, that's a frequency, if you will, that then they become more adept at tapping into, which is again broadening this perspective of who we are, and at the same time becoming more clear about these essential qualities, these essential aspects of ourselves that are so rewarding, with the authentic self, whatever language you want to call it, but this essential self that then we want to dwell in more and more. It's almost like addictive. Like that's why an artist, their art becomes so important, because at the same time that they're creating it, it's creating them.
Yes. And then when us mortals look at the art, we have a similar experience.
No, that's right.
We transport ourselves. Something happens in our body, in our physical, in our emotion, from just looking at the art. We may not be able even to explain it.
And it's outside of space and time. I mean, some classical piece of art can be done a gazillion years ago, and it's applicable today. It changes it's got another side to it that becomes opened up. It's
becomes a portal.
A portal. Thank you.
It's a portal for a moment of moving beyond the head into firing and through the marriage of intellectual intelligence, body intelligence, creative intelligence. There's a whole myriad of unfamiliar intelligences that are now being worked. And they are contained. More and more it is becoming apparent to me, I'm a late bloomer here, Scott, that they are contained in the body. The body is the landscape that holds all these other bandwidths. The widest frequency that I'm working with right now is the ability to be more fully in my body.
I assume most of your listeners aren't fine art painters, but what I hope all of them are and want to become are relationship artists. Because human beings live in relationship. We're social. Those relationships are grounded and rooted in trust. That trust is rooted in connection and resonance and rapport and getting each other. And that happens in multiple dimensions. And so the primary superhighway of that kind of connection between people is the emotional space. You know, you're having a conversation, you're saying certain words that are the right words, but in the wrong emotional state, it's going to be a miscommunication. And in the right emotional state, you could say just the smallest number of words and it communicates everything. And so one thing I think that your listeners would be fascinated by, a particular view I have on this, that emotions, what emotions are and where they come from. So you were saying, Barnet, about being, the body. Obviously, we feel something in our bodies. But emotions are temporary state changes in the physical body that predispose us for certain actions. Like in an emotion of anger, we're all wired up to punish. In an emotion of celebration and happiness, we're predisposed to party. In an emotion of sadness, we're predisposed to grieve and cry to process that biological loss that we're having. And they're generated by the large organs in the abdomen. That's where the chemicals happen that produce this state change in the body. Well, we're the only animal on the planet that faces the guts toward the other animals. And so that's where all this kind of connection and emotion, and it's both, we feel vulnerable, and maybe too much, so we tighten our stomach, we turn sideways when we talk to people, we cross our arms, we clench down, we tighten up, we stop breathing, so we don't feel so much because we're not used to feeling all that. We haven't developed the body to hold all that, which impacts the quality of the relationships we can have.
I love it because just the language, speaking from my gut, a gut feeling, connecting on the gut level, I think it's absolutely accurate.
Intuition is body wisdom. It's wisdom that comes through the body, comes up, and then we make a meaning out of it, and we might take an action. But it's body wisdom. And furthermore, I believe that one of the reasons that we're harming the planet these days is because we've disconnected from our bodies.
Absolutely.
We've overemphasized the mind.
Absolutely.
We've disconnected from the body, and the body is what we use to connect to the earth. We don't connect to the earth through our minds. It's the earth is a concept in our minds. But in our body, we can feel it, and we can be in relationship with it.
And this dynamic relationship between these aspects, that when they're coherent, when we're not conflicted, when they're all operating in the same wavelength, if you will, then the output becomes something very generous, and the world responds. I mean, this is what we kind of go back to the very beginning, that a sense of leadership is an embodying of leadership. It's not conceptual. You can't teach it in a textbook. It's something that someone has to come to. And it's interesting because I know that your work with the Navy SEALs, that a part of this is them having these incredible breakthrough experiences where they learn that they've got more and more capacity they didn't know about. And in fact, that's what the leadership quality is. the discipline, the other pieces are all there. But really, it's this larger expansion process that allows them more capacity to be more present to more aspects of themselves that naturally is going to make them better leaders.
Yeah, I think some of the best leaders today are people that can create enough relationship, trust, and safety to have people take risks. And out of taking those risks, they're expanded. And they believe in themselves more. They're more committed to what the organization's up to. They want to do more of that because they feel better. They make a bigger contribution. And I think that's maybe part of the secret of the Navy SEALs is that they kind of slay the ego, and they have in the basic training there, or Hell Week, the ones that make it can see that they're greater than they thought they ever were, and they can never go back from that.
Mm.
So tell me what's happening with you. What is next for you, Scott?
Well, every year we start our Art of Leadership Mastery program, and so we're in the process of sharing that with people so they know if it's right for them. We do that once a year in Ojai, California here. So that's up.
When does that begin?
It begins April 19th.
And where can people find out more about that?
Go to the website. Institute for Embodied Wisdom has a website called embodiedwisdom.com, and /ALM for Art of Leadership Mastery. You can have all the information there and find all about those events. And then we have our Samurai Games when we do that listed there too.
Great. Or you can go to our Cutting Edge Consciousness website or our Facebook page to do that as well. So, and I encourage everyone to look deeply into that. It's an incredible experience. You're also working with NASA.
Yes.
Are these all classified? Would people have to kill you if you said anything about what's going on there?
No. Fortunately, the work I do there is not classified. Yeah, it's really thrilling for me to have the privilege to work with the fine folks at NASA. Just as a personal note, I grew up in Thousand Oaks. My father worked at Rocketdyne when I was a kid, testing the engines for the Saturn V rocket, and we'd feel the vibrations.
I'm doing a workshop with them in 2 weeks.
Yeah, great. And then I watched all the launches and all these things, and was just completely into it. And Apollo 11 landed on the moon on my 11th birthday. I mean, it's very, very exciting. So get to work with NASA is fantastic. And how that happened was a colleague of mine and I were visioning. We gave ourselves permission to vision big. And we took a walk and we said, what if we had unlimited budget, world's best client, no restrictions? What would we do to really push the edge of leadership and leadership development, giving everything we knew? And we came up with this, and within a couple of months, NASA calls and looking for some kind of leadership program, but they wanted, 1 ounce of leadership. We had 10 pounds, And so that program was called Leadership Alchemy, and we did it at NASA for 9 years, taking their PhD scientists and engineers and turning them into human beings that you could connect to, because they overemphasized the mind for so many years researching something, and then they got $1 billion to make it happen, and now they needed to lead people. And so it was very transformative. It's 9 months long, and it won a lot of awards, and was ranked by Warren Bennis's Leadership Excellence magazine as the number 7 best in leadership development for the federal government or military.
Wow.
Which is 7, you go, oh, number 7, okay, at least we're on top 10. But when you think of the Naval Academy as number 6, and West Point was number 5, and we beat the Navy SEALs and the Army Rangers.
That's incredible.
Very nice.
I just think, and maybe I'm tying it too tightly, but I don't think I am, that what you brought up was the resonant, was the frequency, the resonant energy that resonated, and how it got reflected back was someone calling from NASA and saying, hey, we're ready, and you're going, oh, so are we. I feel that happen a lot, Barnet. We've talked a lot about this, where you have something you're working on, and then someone says, I want to make a movie about that, the next day kind of thing.
But I will say that operates. It's always operating, but it operates at a level that is discernible and packs in that looks like that ecstatic explosion of coincidence on the shoulders of quite a bit of practice and quite a bit of mastery and quite a bit of self-authority. And it is a nice opportunity for us to ask you to unpack some of your thoughts around vision. What would you have to say to any of our listeners that are intrigued with the idea of vision and how vision can be implemented and a practical source for inspiration and reality creation in their lives?
Well, it's a big area because many people want something or try something, or they can see it or they can desire it, and are, they talk, I really like to, or I really want, and it's not sufficient. It doesn't produce the result until the vision, the desire, becomes embodied. It's going to be very, very difficult to achieve. But once it's embodied, once it's part of who you are and lives in your fiber, then it almost can't not happen.
So interesting, because it goes back to the idea of being conflicted. That when we're conflicted, it blocks the energy.
Well, let's not make it so hard. We get conflicted because we play ping pong in our heads.
Yes.
What I'm loving about what you're saying is love the head game and get off the dance floor.
Yeah.
Because the bigger game is the body intelligence.
That's right. And so to have it become embodied, we have to bring the full self into the communication. It can't just be a good idea that you speak. And most people want the idea to be so compelling, the business plan to be so tight, that any logical person would go for it. But what human beings do, because we're trust machines and our future is completely uncertain, is we hear the great idea, but what my body's doing when I hear your great idea, Freeman, is I'm going, who's this guy proposing this idea,
right.
And does my body trust his body to pull it off?
That's it.
No matter how fantastic the idea is.
Yeah.
But that's unconscious. And then my body gets uncomfortable, and then I say, no, I'm not going to invest or I'm not going to join. And you ask me why, I'll give you a logical reason about the market or the analysis or...
But it's really occurring at the level of the gut.
That's right. It's a systemic issue because in this body, which is the map of the subconscious...
Yep.
The
body
one,
is the map of the subconscious.
We move out to our communities and to our country. Is our country perceived energetically as trustworthy?
Right.
The country itself is not embody its highest values and aspirations, and we are moving towards that and moving through and understanding some of the resistances to that. But they're all happening. All of these macro and pictures and micro pictures are all happening all at the same time. And for me, the edge of my own discovery is the movement, not from one system to another, but beyond a love affair I've had with my logic and reason, expanding outwards to be able to include that.
Absolutely.
And be open to a discovery of something mysterious that is more, that I can hold in an embodied state.
And a sense of vision of what's possible, because that's the moving forward, is there's this sense that something's possible, and we start to call it out in a particular way. And go ahead.
And then right there, when we make that move, discomfort.
Oh, of course.
Not knowing.
Yeah.
Not being sure. And then people shrink back because they don't have the body to hold the discomfort.
Yeah.
And what we want to practice is embracing that discomfort as a signpost that you're on the way.
But people go, they have a discomfort, and immediately they bring it up to the head and make a story about it.
Right, exactly.
Because it is more familiar. Perhaps at one time in our development as young children, as small people, it was safer and easier to make a story about it than to risk the overwhelm, the inundation in the body. But as large people now, we have this habituated pattern of crunching, shoehorning all emotion and experience in the body, and it happens so quickly we're not aware of it. We make a story of it, and then we process it at a virtual level and not at a somatic level.
And I summarize all that by saying, until your purpose is bigger than the pain, it's probably not going to happen.
Say that again.
Until your purpose is bigger than the pain or the discomfort, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And with that,
Title for the show.
As painful as it is, we have to say goodbye. But, Scott, we're thrilled you took the time to be with us here on Cutting Edge Consciousness.
We love you, man.
Before we let you go, let's give the folks the website one more time.
Yeah, embodiedwisdom.com/ALM.
/ALM. And we invite you to check that out. Of course, this will also be up on the Cutting Edge Consciousness website, and we invite you...
And on our Facebook page.
And we invite you to share this with friends and keep coming back to Cutting Edge Consciousness.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this work. It's really, I think, wonderful for the world.
Bless you.
Thank you.